Today we have Rebecca Walker here. She's part of our, is this the Bunche Author Series?
Bunche Center Author Series.
Bunche Center Author Series. Yes. Alex and I work together so well. Okay. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction about Rebecca and her life. So Rebecca is the daughter of Pulitzer Prize winning novelist Alice Walker and esteemed civil rights attorney Mel Leventhal. She graduated magna cum laude from Yale University in '92. She also received many awards, including the Women of Distinction Award from the National Association of University Women, Feminist of the Year Award from the Fund for the Feminist Majority, the Paz y Justicia Award from the Vanguard Foundation, and the Intrepid Award from the National Organization for Women. Walker is the author of 4 books, To Be Real.
7 books.
7 books, okay.
But that's okay.
That was Wikipedia.
I'm telling you, it's useless. And even the starting with the parent thing, that's just,
So
anyway.
To Be Real, Telling the Truth and Changing the Face of Feminism, Black, White, and Jewish, Autobiography of a Shifting Self, What Makes a Man, 22 Writers Imagine the Future, and Baby Love, Choosing Motherhood After a Lifetime of Ambivalence. Her latest collection, One Big Happy Family, explores the explosion of non-traditional family configurations in the U.S. So I think that was 5 books, actually. And then Black Cool, so we're missing one. Okay, so...
Wait, are you missing one? Let me think, is it 6 or 7? No, it is 7 because there's a new one, yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Okay, so Walker also co-founded the Third Wave Foundation, a nonprofit organization aiming to encourage young women to get involved in activism and leadership roles. She contributes to the global conversation about identity, power, culture, and the evolution of the human family through books, lectures, blogs, social networks, popular magazines, literary and academic journals, radio programs, and film and television appearances and content development. She lives in Hawaii and Northern California with her son and his father. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca Walker as she discusses her latest work, Black Cool, 1,000 Streams of Blackness, which offers a compelling and sustained conversation about the multiple meanings of blackness in the United States today.
Nice. So I'm so glad to see you all. How are you doing? Good? Do you want to get closer together? How do you feel about that idea?
Or you guys can move up if you want.
Yeah, like just so that we can be more intimate. One of my mentors at Yale's Bell Hooks, do you all know Bell Hooks' work? So she calls this the patriarchal pulpit. And I've kind of embellished to call it now the phallic shield, and I've gone many directions with it. And the idea is that it sets up this relationship between the person speaking and the people being spoken to, this hierarchical relationship. The idea that I have the knowledge and you're here to absorb the knowledge, but the truth is that we all have knowledge. And this is a kind of construct that's not necessarily beneficial to a holistic experience, yeah?
But you can sit at the table if you like. That's why we have the chair.
Yes, I know. So, but here's the thing. The thing about the patriarchal podium / phallic shield is that it's very handy and functional. So it's nice, I like to say both things because I think they're important, and also just to remind us that the podium and the patriarchal pulpit, the connection is also with the church, and reminding us that higher education really stemmed from the church, and so the pulpit was the place where the minister, the preacher, whomever it was the interlocutor between God and the people, right? And so this is just a replica of that within an educational environment, right? And that is worthy of critique and understanding, right? So usually what I do is I'll do a little talk and use the patriarchal pulpit and then step out from behind the patriarchal pulpit and just answer questions and have a more intimate, interactive experience. Because there's so much more, I think, to be gained from being open and vulnerable and not hiding and not sort of wearing the face and, being official. And that's, you can really feel that difference of just being here versus being here, right? It's a big difference. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Black Cool. and then answer any questions you have about the book or any other piece of work or anything else that you're thinking about that I might be able to talk to. So Black Cool is about many different things. I think I got the inspiration for it when I was still in college, and I was studying with Robert Ferris Thompson. Do any of you know his work? Yeah, well, you probably took class with him. Did you take Mambo?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so
Study African art.
oh, good for you. Great. So Robert Ferris Thompson is one of the real pioneers, anthropologist, art historian, who has documented the Afro-Atlantic aesthetic, which is, now something that we know, but before him we didn't really have it as a part of our lexicon. So he traced African culturalisms as they are embedded in the African American and also the African diasporic environment, right? So the ways in which different tropes of African cosmologies have been suppressed and buried and need to be decoded in order to understand where they come from and what they mean from their original context. And so I studied with him, and I started to really think a lot about that idea of the encoding of the built environment specifically. And I did my thesis work on something that I ended up calling shack aesthetic. I went and I studied rural shacks in the South and tried to identify these tropes of African culture that I thought were present even in very, very poor, challenged environments. For example, in Yoruba culture, West African culture, Ogun is the god of iron, and the god of war, and the god of strength. And one of the things that I always noticed in my family, really, is that all of my uncles in the South, in the rural South, all of my ancestors on that side of the family grew up very, very poor. And they always had these cars everywhere. There were like cars in the front yard, there were cars being, in the driveway. It was just like cars everywhere. And I sort of started to see that as a manifestation of this relationship with iron, right? So with metal, a kind of buried dynamic that has come through from this diasporic experience. And they're not necessarily thinking of it that way, but I started to look at it that way. Another is the chair. When you look at, specifically in this context, in shacks in the rural South, but also in, hey, I'm good, but also in many, many African American homes and homes in the diaspora, you see a lot of empty chairs. People having, chairs either on the porch or chairs in their bedrooms, or just these empty chairs that are sometimes used but often just left there. And when I studied Yoruba culture and culture of Sierra Leone and the Mende people, there's a whole discourse about leaving an open chair for the spirit to come in and sit, right? So leaving this space. And when I was looking around, there were these empty chairs everywhere. So again, decoding what's in the environment and linking it to this Afro-Atlantic tradition. Another was my grandmother had not just, when you go to people's homes and you see they have usually, maybe 10, 15, 20 pictures of family members, right, on the mantle or something. My grandmother had hundreds, like behind her favorite chair. And it was this incredible mosaic of the family, generations and generations. And to me, I linked that to this deep emphasis on the extended family, on ancestry and the understanding of the importance of ancestry, on kinship, and so these are elements that are recognizable if you decode them, if you don't just go by and think, oh yeah, that's just a wall full of pictures. There's actually something there. There's a cosmology that's very sustaining built into these things. So I was thinking a lot about that in college, and then in the 2008 campaign, I saw the iconic, I think now, image of Barack Obama coming out of the town car. I don't know if you all saw it. He's coming out of the town car. He's got his jacket over his shoulder, and he's wearing shades. And everyone, we all kind of agreed as a culture, American culture, that he looked so cool. Like it was like he was the epitome of cool. And I was mesmerized by the image, and I put it up in my studio, and I just kept looking at it because I had this instinct that not only was he embodying cool, but he was embodying black cool. And I went back to Thompson's work and was reminded that the three words that Africans brought to these shores, in particular to African American culture, but now obviously global culture, are funky, hip, and cool. And so I started to really think about what that means. What are the implications of that? And the implications of that are that if we did not have blackness, we would not have this thing that we call cool. So in fact, Obama was embodying, and everything that we see that looks as cool has some kind of relationship with blackness, right, and an African cultural stream of expression and aesthetic. And I became very sort of fixated and engaged with the notion that we needed to decode this aesthetic in order to have a deeper understanding of what it was saying. So when Thompson went and studied in Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone and Senegal, and people told him, you know, that's cool. And he said, well, what does that mean exactly? And they said to him, cool is about compassion, it's about dignity in the face of injustice, it's about deep moral responsibility, taking responsibility for your actions, it's about doing the right thing, it's about having deep composure and a kind of stability in the face of chaos. That was just the beginning. And so when you see Obama, and I sort of began to think about all of the different elements that were embedded in that image of Obama, and to see those repeated in lots of different images of cool. And I wanted to decode the elements. So it's not just dignity, it's not just compassion, it's not just reserve, though those are all very important, but it's also audacity, right? The audacity of being a black man running for president, the audacity of being a multiracial man running for president, the audacity of being a man with a Muslim name running for president. Reserve, very, very important aspect of black cool. The mask, using the total control of one's facial and bodily movements to express a kind of grace and dignity and inscrutability. It's like the ultimate poker face, but it's got another kind of deeper spiritual component, if you will. So audacity, reserve, the posse, this idea of the communal, you know, the family. Obama came kind of ready-made with Michelle and the beautiful children, and his emphasis on keeping the family intact, right? His emphasis on showing that love, his emphasis on seeing his partner as an equal and supporting her as much as she supported him. That was a very important part of the cool. And so in this book we identify that as the posse, which is something that we've seen within hip-hop culture or contemporary culture, you know, rolling with my posse, and there's a kind of cool effect to that, but we don't take the time to decode it as part of this larger thread of a religious or spiritual or community building cosmology. The emphasis on the importance of healthy family, healthy community, peaceful relationships, the posse. And so on. And so I decided to ask some of my favorite writers to either take one of the elements that I identified as being a part of this cosmology and write about the element, or to choose their own. Because I wanted to see, I think that all of us hold within us an understanding of this cool if we take the time to deeply reflect on what's going on in this aesthetic. So I wanted to give all the writers the chance to kind of tease it out. And I wanted this book to be just the beginning of building this deeper, more extensive lexicon and lens, ability to read Black cool. And so that's what the book is. It's a collection of pieces. I wanted to do the book not just because I'm fascinated by the process of what, but also because I think within this post-racial discourse, there's a chance that the idea, the notion that the ownership of cool is black. I mean, we are the purveyors of black cool, and we are the purveyors then of global cool. And in order for us to really understand the ways in which we need to be both compensated, respected, acknowledged for what we bring to the global cultural table, we need to hold on to that, as opposed to within a post-racial dialogue lose it, right, and just kind of let it go. And a lot of my work has been about deconstructing race and blurring all of those lines and understanding it's a historical construct and all of that. So this is really a kind of a swing in a certain way, but it's one that I think is very important in light of post-racial discourse, but also because so many young people now have they have a sense of cool being about consumerism, about bling, about a kind of hyper-masculinity that's emotionally stoic, that's not about the peaceful relationship, that's not about dignity necessarily, that's not about resistance. They have a kind of degraded view of black cool. And so, and I think, and the moment that happened for our generation, this break from this cool that sustained black people through many, many awful times, and my generation, which seems to have gotten very confused about what the cosmology underlying the success of blackness, the survival of our people for so long. Hank Willis Thomas, who's a visual artist, who's a very wonderful artist, writes about the moment for him, and I would say for many of us, that switched over was in the Spike Lee ad for Air Jordans. Does anybody remember that, or are you guys too young for that? Yeah, so Spike Lee, you all know Spike Lee, so he did these ads for Nike. And it was right after his first movie came out, and the ad was that he was not cool enough to get the girl. But if he bought the sneakers, he would be cool. And that was one of many fractures that recast black cool as something that had to be consumed, something that was outside of us, something that was not a kind of innate way of moving through the world, that was not part of a cultivated culture. So all of a sudden, you buy the sneakers, you buy the jeans, you buy the diamonds, you do, swagger, which is a part of an expression of dignity and self-confidence, became a kind of hyper-masculine, aggressive stance, as opposed to a space of creativity and imagination, right? So these things happened in many different locations, and that created this break. And I'm very concerned, right, about young people losing this cosmology that can be so supportive. And so that was another reason that I decided to do this collection. And let's see, what else can I say about it? It's been a very interesting process. One of the challenges was initially to get writers actually to articulate something that is so ineffable, because we have lost the language necessary to decode and describe what it is we're looking at. But we've lost our own connection to black cool. So I would ask writers, okay, I want you to write about audacity and how it is embodied within the aesthetic of black cool. And they, it's like, what? So each piece was like that. Matt Johnson, I don't know if you know him, he's a great writer, just won a lot of awards for his last novel. He wrote a piece called The Geek, but for me, geek, just geek, right. Yeah, wasn't that great? But really that element is intellectual engagement and passion in the face of a culture telling you to dumb down, and a sort of reclamation of this kind of brilliance, right? But again, it was very difficult for him to get to that. So many of the writers wanted to contextualize their piece within either only a tradition, a sort of narrative of oppression and the burden and coming out of slavery. And I just had to keep saying, you have to look beyond that. You have to look earlier than that, because these are actually stories of a cosmology and of a system of ideas that are thousands of years old. They predate slavery. And slavery was a location where we applied some of these skills, some of these ideas, but it was not the originating spot, right? That was not where they came from. And so once we started opening it up, then it became a little easier. But Stacey Ann Chin writes about authenticity. Do you know Stacey Ann Chin's work? Great writer, spoken word, half Jamaican, half black, beautiful, just had a baby. Matt Johnson. Dream Hampton wrote the first piece about audacity. And another thing that was important to me was, so often we locate black cool in a masculine paradigm. So we think about Miles, or we think about, who else do we think about? We think about the Black Panthers, the men in the Black Panthers. So it's so located. But I wanted to show that actually these elements are transcendent of gender. Right? So Dream's piece about audacity, the pinnacle of it is when she takes a bicycle chain and fights off a boy who's trying to rape her. And she summons this audacity in a moment where she is supposed to be passive and repels him, and is able to kind of manifest a fearlessness that she then carries with her for the rest of her life. And she writes about that. And the book is pretty stacked, actually. It's heavy on women. There are 16 pieces, right? 2, 4, 6, 8. Yeah, there are 16 pieces, 4 by men, the rest by women, because I felt that was so important to emphasize, because women's voices are often left out of this discussion. What else can I tell you? So it was difficult in that way. It was difficult because I had to really grapple with some things myself, because in fact, even though it's a critique of the commodification of black cool, I actually was doing a book which is the commodification of black cool, so I had to really think about that. And also, one of the elements of black cool that has been a part of its success is that it has moved in a stealth way. There's a hidden quality passed on from generation to generation, and there's a sense that if you begin to expose the elements, they are more easily exploited and assimilated, even more, I didn't want to give the roadmap of the whole shebang, but at the same time, I feel like at this point, it's so needed, and I had to just say, okay, it's necessary, and if we don't do it, it's going to be lost. So I made peace with it, but it is definitely issues that I grappled with. Also, the idea of essentialism, of a kind of black African essentialism. Is there something innate about black people and blackness? That's something that I, in a lot of my work before this, have debated and challenged. And with this book, I've come back to, or I've come to this sense of there is something about black people. We have something, and I don't know if it's in the DNA. I'm not ready to say that it's but it's powerful, and you see it in action all over the world. And when you see it, you recognize it, and it doesn't matter what culture it's embedded in. It's there. So that was something that I also thought a lot about. What does it mean to put out a book that says basically that this aesthetic is organic, is germane to a people? And finally, before I answer questions, I really, my goal is I never want people to see something cool and think of it as removed from Blackness, like ever. I think I want that to be done, right? Because in the same way that I live in Hawaii, and I was just watching a film about hula and the women who have kept the hula tradition alive. And there's never going to be a moment, I hope, when hula is separated from Hawaiian culture. Right? There's never going to be a moment when yoga is separated from Indian and Hindu culture. There's never going to be a moment when French cuisine is separated from France, right? And no one asks people to make that separation. But with Black cool, with African culture or Blackness, there is this sense that cool is not, it's not our cultural product. It's not, we don't own it in the same way that Hawaiians own hula. And I want to change that completely, forever, done. When I was doing an NPR show, Talk of the Nation, at the beginning of the tour, we had people call in and say, what was the first time you saw something that was, cool? And almost everybody came with a white reference. So the first caller said, Steve McQueen. And I said, okay. I said, what about Steve McQueen? He had this incredible swagger. He had this incredible reserve. He had this incredible sense of like authenticity and resistance. And I said, and where do you think he got that? Did he get that from Steve McQueen? Let's say, did he get that from Irish culture? Did he get that from British? Where did that come from? Who was he watching his whole life? I think this discussion has been started and really, this is not new. We've talked about this with Elvis, right? That's a trope that we know. But that. So that's one of the real, when it's all said and done, I hope that this book contributes to that understanding, and that we no longer see these things as separate, and that we can own them and use them and wear them and express ourselves with pride, understanding that there's a very profound cosmology beneath the way we walk, talk, think, move. So there's a piece on swagger by Daoud Bey at the end of the book. Daoud Bey is a wonderful photographer, and he writes about swagger, and of course the one of the moments that's been talked about in the last few years about swagger has to do with a couple of years, or I don't remember when Osama bin Laden was found, but was when Obama came out and announced that Osama bin Laden had been killed. Do you guys remember that moment? And he turned around and he said, he made a statement, right? And he had to be like totally, sort of race neutral and, all the things he had to be. And then he turned around and he swaggered down that hallway. And those of us who can read that, know exactly what's going on there. And it's not arrogance, and that's what's really important, because I think some readers would think, oh, what is that's sort of arrogant, or they link it to, I don't know, pimp culture, or they link it to hip hop, wherever they go with it. But in fact, when you think about a people that have been oppressed for so long and suppressed, in terms of feeling confident and feeling like, we are achievers, we are leaders, we are powerful, the way that we move our bodies can express all of that, And so to me, when I read him, when I see that swagger, what I see is a kind of resistance to people underestimating him. I see a self-confidence and pride in himself, and I see, a kind of dignity, and representing, and so that was a deep moment for me on a lot of different levels and could be read as such. So I think you get the idea, yeah? And it was a real joy to do the book, and it's been a really amazing journey putting it out. It is I think it's my 7th book. I have a new book, but maybe that's my 7th book. Anyway, bunch of books. This one has had a kind of instant resonance with people, which has been very satisfying for me. It's like people feel this book, and as a writer, that's what you want. You want people to feel your work. It's not just an intellectual piece, it's a piece that hopefully is transformative on a lot of different levels. And that's what I hear back from readers, and that's what is gratifying to me as a writer. From the beginning of my career, I've always said, if a book, one of my books doesn't function in someone's lives and doesn't change them in some way that's powerful and positive, there's no point for me to write it. I'm not a writer that just wants to write. I'm a writer that is about that moment when the work and the person who needs the work or who wants the work find each other, and then something magical happens. That's who I am. And so this book has been gratifying in that way, because I see that happening, like almost instantly. With some of my earlier work, it's taken, I mean, I don't want to say that I'm always a couple of years ahead, or not ahead, but early, and sometimes I hear the reverberations of my work. You know, so Baby Love came out in 2007, and now it's, 2012, it's 5 years, and now many, many people are embracing it and loving it and experiencing it, but at the time it was a little bit, you know, it entered in a moment that wasn't quite ripe for it. But this book feels like there's a real need and a longing and a appreciation of what it's trying to do, what it is doing. So that's the journey with this book, and I'm happy to take some questions and now have a dialogue about some of these ideas from behind the patriarchal pulpit, or in front of it. Yeah, go ahead. I'm actually going to sit on this table. I can't sit on this table. I'm going to sit on a chair.
If you fail, the universe will.
Yes, yes. Okay, and I may stand up. I like to be in motion. It's part of my cool. We move. We're not static.
That's why we gave you a chair with wheels.
Yeah, there you go. And a podium. I love it. Options. Okay, so what do you think? Thoughts? Questions? Lance.
You know, listening to you speak about this and being familiar with your work, and you were talking about how the black cool has been commodified. And I'm just thinking of so many other things in our culture, whether it's black cool or anything else, and this commodification seems to extract out any sense of the spiritual. And do you feel like that's when the black cool, as you describe it, went from being composed to being hard, and it got commodified as being like kind of hard? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think American culture, especially hyper-capitalist American culture, what we do, you know, as you know, is we extract what we can commodify from every culture, and we sort of denude it. We strip it of of its context culturally, and often exactly what you're talking about. It's kind of spiritual essence, the fiber, you know, the texture of it that has that spiritual dynamic. Yeah, and I mean, you know, again, I think yoga is a great example. I'm not, you know, I have a whole critique of Hinduism and yoga and all of that, but I think yoga is a very good example of how the spiritual element is slowly being sort of leached, and what we get is this product of, you know, poses, and which is fine, but it's important to know that that's what's happening.
Right.
So I do think that is what has happened with cool in many ways. You don't see that in a lot of contemporary expressions of cool. But I think, again, before the break, you saw it much more. I mean, if you think about Dr. King, if you think about Mahalia Jackson, even if you think about Nina Simone, if you think about, I mean, when you think about the greats who have embodied this cool before this generation, they had that spiritual I mean, they were imbued with a different energy, right? That is rare now. I mean, I think you see it sometimes in, you know, when I ask people, who do you think is cool now? The last talk, the person that came up was Erykah Badu, which was really interesting because I think she does have a spiritual element, and she really puts that out. But a lot of artists don't. A lot of black artists don't. And I have also been talking about Whitney Houston because one of the talks for the book happened on the day that she died, or the day after she died. And I was talking about how I had been doing #BlackCool on all social media and identifying these different pictures and people who, to me, embodied some of these elements that I've been identifying. And I couldn't find one for Whitney. Like, I just couldn't find a way to #BlackCool her, and it was very unsettling. And I think ultimately I had to grapple with the fact that it had to do with what I see as a loss of her authenticity. And authenticity is a key component of Black Cool, you know, being who you are no matter what. And I have a great respect for Whitney and love for her, and I'm, you know, it's not a degradation in any way, but it's an understanding that when she was turned into this kind of pop cultural goddess, heterosexual being, she lost something that was authentic, right? And I think that created a lot of pain and trauma for her, and you know, that. So there's something about authenticity too that allows the spiritual to come in, you know. Valerie Thomas, who's a professor at Pomona, wrote a piece in the book about the break. And the break is something that we all are familiar with. The break in music is when the music stops, right? In black music, we know that moment. Music stops, and you're like left, and then it comes back. And in West African culture, the break in music is often the space, again, like the empty chair. It's the space where the spirit comes in. It's the room that's left to imbue the entire community with spirit. And Valerie talks about how, as African Americans, we live in this break. We live in this open space, this dynamic of neither here nor there. We're constantly kind of spinning out into a kind of emptiness that both carries a great deal of potential and is also challenging to navigate. Does that make sense? So she's pointing at the spiritual there and locating it in a very grounded way for the community, I think. It's a very powerful piece. And she actually, I had to edit it out because I thought it was getting too broad, but she connected it to a kind of Buddhist idea of emptiness, and which is a whole other discussion, and takes it out of the Christian paradigm, which is so dominant in the black community and which often obstructs our ability to fully own this other cosmology that came before black Christianity. So that's another issue of spirit. I mean, you know, what does it look like? Where did it come from? Is it organic? Is it true? Is it sustaining? Why is it sustaining? And I would argue that, you know, we need to have a critical view of the black church, because the black church did not come with us from Africa. There were no Africans landed on these shores as a Christian. And Christianity and slavery were so enmeshed, you know, that any, I think, self-respect, well, any critically aware person would at least have to take a look at that dynamic, and wonder, why am I carrying this tradition forward as an African American person? It was forced upon us, really. So, long answer. Yeah. Oh, yes. Masai.
I've been cool all my life.
That's right. You're cool right now. Mm-hmm.
I remember as kindergarten, first grade, I grew up in Compton, and I remember walking home with two of my buddies, and we practiced our cool walk. Mm-hmm. It was important to have a cool walk. Mm-hmm. I remember later hearing a Bill Cosby album, and he talked about his cool walk and walking in the house. His mother saying, "Boy, what's the matter with your leg?"
Right.
But I thought then that I'm onto something.
That's right.
I know what I'm doing here. It's cool. I can wear this jacket of coolness very comfortably. And I never felt uncomfortable or felt unclear about it or challenged by it. And I don't know about Steve McQueen. I think he's cool, but I remember I think it was a TV series called Moonlighting. Bruce Willis character. And when I saw him, right away I said, he's trying to be cool here.
Right.
He's appropriating something from me and selling it. And it's inauthentic. But it was close.
Yeah,
So I don't know what I'm saying here. It's just that. So when I saw your book, and I haven't finished it, I read a couple of pieces. I haven't got to Swagger, so I didn't know that was there.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
But when I think of cool, I remember myself just wanting to have this cool walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
First it was very exaggerated, then it smooths it out.
Yeah.
And you own it.
That's right. That's right. And it's a part of expressing one's identity and physicality and we have that. I don't know what else to say. I mean, one of the moments that struck me when I was thinking about the book was, there's a moment in Men in Black, the movie with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, where they both put on the suit. You know that moment? And they put on the suit, and Will says to Tommy Lee, he says, "You know what's different about us?" And Tommy Lee says, "Well," he says, "I make this suit look good." And there's, it's all up in there. It's like, why is that? What is that makes that work? And yes, so there is this idea of it being appropriated, but not quite, and we can see it. And I think that's important, to be able to see the ways in which, and Bruce Willis made millions of dollars from that movie, and while more and more men who are the progenitors, who are the carriers of that, are in prison. And so it's very political. I mean, there's a kind of destruction of the creators of the culture and the use of the culture to uplift and coolify and grow, the other part of the culture. And until that's articulated more clearly and we really understand what's happening, it's going to keep happening in that way, right? Yeah.
I thank you very much. That was awesome. I haven't read your book, so this might be an obvious question, but I was really interested in how you talked about how today, like, young people are losing this idea of cool. And, like, as a 24-year-old, I'm like, oh, that's me. But I was wondering if, in writing the book, either you have someone under the age of 30 who wrote, or if in your book tours...
That's a good question.
...you were talking to people, like, in their teenagers or 20s about this idea.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've been talking to a lot of educators, people who are teaching high school, who are taking the book and using it to teach their students, because they feel, especially here in LA, the LA school system is really problematic, and they understand that a lot of kids are falling through the cracks because of ideas like, I'm too cool for school, this hypermasculinity that is kind of criminalizing, and so they are using the book to give young people options for thinking about different ways of being cool. So yes. In terms of writers being under 30, no. I don't think there are any writers under 30. But I think that has to do with wanting, there is this break. There's so few young people who who have that continuity with the older ideas, right? So this is for them to read and sort of part of a reclamation that is multi-generational, hopefully, but there's a big break there. I mean, Stacey Ann is pretty young. I would say everyone's in their 30s and, 30s, early 40s, very much aware of this moment of losing something, yeah? Hank's piece where he talks about Spike Lee ends with his friend being shot. And the thing about his friend that was so cool was his soulfulness and the way that he could just be with anyone and like have a vibe with anyone. And he wasn't trying to pretend he was anything else. He was like a heart. And he was killed because somebody wanted his gold chain or something, some ridiculous. And that, again, that moment of losing the soulfulness and exchanging it for this external validation is something that I think is very real for my generation. I'm not so sure that the younger people even had that moment, I don't know. Did you have that moment?
I don't think so. I think I grew up in the 90s. Michael Jordan was cool.
Right. Exactly. Right.
It might be interesting to do like volume 2.
Everyone says that. And I think it would be interesting because there are several elements that I wanted to have in the book that I couldn't get people to write. I worked with them. Asha Bandele, who wrote The Prisoner's Wife, great memoir, you should all read it. It's about a creative writing, she's a wonderful writer, creative writing instructor who was working in prisons, teaching writing. She fell in love with an inmate, Rashid. They ended up getting married in prison. She had a child. She became pregnant. She had a child. And it's just a gorgeous memoir about that experience. And she has since continued to work in the prison system. And the piece I wanted her to write was about dignity and how even in an environment where black people's dignity the environment is designed to strip dignity, many of us are able to maintain it in different ways with almost nothing. And that is so powerful to me, and but it was so hard for her because she was like, I just can't emotionally go there, But so dignity is not covered. Hybridity, I'm really interested in the ways in which this kind of black cool aesthetic is able to incorporate other elements into it without losing itself. And there's a kind of adaptive dynamic. So when you go back anthropologically, or you go back, I don't know, paleo, what are people, anyway, if you go back and you start looking at Cro-Magnon man versus, what's the other man? The Cro-Magnons and the Neanderthals. So the Neanderthals obviously were inflexible, territorial. They did not survive because they could not adapt to an influx of other cultures, and they were just warrior-esque. So their response to difference was to dominate and kill, and that's part of why they no longer exist. But Cro-Magnon man humans are much closer to us, most of us, hopefully, and we survived because we have an adaptive dynamic. We're able to adapt to different circumstances and have a kind of flexibility that's within our cortex, our whatever it is, that has allowed us to survive, right? There's a big difference there. And so I'm interested in how that functions within Black cool aesthetic, because I think there's some connection there, and I needed somebody who was really knowledgeable about that to take it on, because I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be, and I couldn't write it. Just 1 second. I was also interested in kind of harmonic dissonance, like the way that Black cool is able to hold influences that seem antithetical, but within the aesthetic of cool somehow are not. For some reason, what just flashed through my head is actually an image that I don't like, but I was thinking of Willow Smith. I know, it's so funny that came to mind, but she cut all her hair off after the whip my hair moment, and she dyed it blonde, and then she was wearing these huge glasses that are kind of like Steve Urkel-esque, kind of hyper uber nerd glasses. So she put together this aesthetic that seemed very dissonant. She brought all these different elements together, and somehow it worked. It was like, wait a minute. And I think you could say that was true of many of our great musicians, many of our great artists, many of our great scientists, people who brought together different ideas within their fields that were not thought to be congruent, but in fact they created something very dynamic as a result of putting these things together.
So we have
Isaac Hayes. That's a good example.
right, Rebecca.
There are many.
One more question.
Oh my
before we allow
gosh.
you to sign some books and
Okay.
you can come up and ask Sherelle.
That was quick.
May I have class?
Sure, honey.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye, yeah.
I just wanted to say, as you spoke and you started speaking, I never connected cool with spirituality. I think it is, and I think it's across cultures. And I think that even white people, they don't know that that's what it is, but those people have the it factor. And it's just something about that person that you're drawn to, whether you're black, white, you don't know it's cool. But that's exactly what it is, and I never really thought about that as some kind of a connection, even across cultures. That's what that connection is. People drawn to Obama and drawn to. I remember the first time I saw him sign, I was like, wow, And it wasn't like you were doing nothing. Like it was just something about you, and it's something about that person that you're drawn to them.
Now, my husband would say he's not happy really with he
No?
well I hear what you're saying, and I agree, and I think it's important, but I think we need to do this and then we can get bigger. But his argument is that basically 40,000 years ago Africans walked out of Africa and began populating the world. So we all have this African ancestry on some level. And so what I am identifying as black cool is actually a part of a profound humanness that is transcendent of a race or a cultural construct, right? So these ideas of dignity, resistance, audacity, engagement with the elements, constant evolution. I mean, these are human characteristics. And you could say that there's a connection there that is even, we could go back, tens of thousands of years, and I'm with that. I can support that. But I still think that at this particular historical moment, it's important to focus on the now. I'm not ready to just give it to everyone, because I think we've held it in a different kind of way, and I want to honor that, because cultures have not honored that. I mean, you could say individuals probably, but the whole package, and let them identify what that is in their culture. You know what I mean? I feel like black people are being destroyed at this point, at this moment. I mean, we are losing ourselves. And I feel like as an artist, it's my role to contribute to the reversal of that.
Okay, we'd like to thank Thomas is here from Messalon Books.